Hey, this is Ralph with Training Concepts. I'm going to walk you through a little demo that we do in our Certified Hacking Forensics Investigator class. And, let me kind of give you guys a little bit of a heads up to what's happening in this demo before I go through it. So in the class, CHFI, we go through a lot of different things in regards to forensics investigations, in regards to incident response. And so one of the big areas that you'll have to deal with if you're an investigator is sometimes you'll be tasked with finding evidence, collecting evidence from log files, collecting evidence from network packets, and so on. So today I'm going to walk through two different tools that we use in the class just to kind of look at some of the information that an investigator might be utilizing today. So the first one is the Kiwi Log Viewer, and then the other one is Wireshark. So with the Kiwi Log File Viewer here, basically it's a Windows-based tool that allows you to go through and do log file management. And so what does that really mean? Well, if you want to parse through a very large file and start just kind of having information kind of draw out to you, it's a really good tool for that. So it can let you open up a log file inside of it and then start adding a simple configuration changes to make some things stand out about that potential log file. It makes it easier just to disseminate some of the information inside that log file. So here, in the first example here, I've got an actual sample of the NJ-RAT Trojan. So basically, once I open this up, this is what it looks like in the log file viewer. And so here what you can see is that basically what's happening in this log file is you've got basically a communication with another outside source over TCP 1177. So as an investigator, your job would be, okay, let's go ahead and see what information I can find out about port 1177 and see if it's anything that might be potential for concern of mine. So I go off to the web and I kind of start searching, and the first thing you'll do is maybe you go off and just do a Google search for port numbers. So you start finding out, okay, I'm looking for TCP port 1177, and then you start happening to find articles like this where it says, well, in this case, the command and control server that NJ-RAT actually uses by default listens on port 1177, so it can feed data back to the attacker and allow the attacker to then basically connect back in to the remote workstation and do all kinds of nasty stuff. So you start looking at this, and then you kind of go off and you find out a little bit more information about the actual remote access Trojan. What can it be as far as useful for the attacker? How can the attacker use something like this to compromise a victim workstation? And what you'll find is oftentimes with a rat or a Trojan, it'll allow the attacker to connect back in and start doing things like disable antivirus or disable the firewall and spy on the user and do all these things. Like in this case, it can turn on the camera of the user's workstation, or it can turn on the microphone. It can start doing key logging and so on and so on. So here in the investigation, that probably raises a lot of red flags. And for us, using a tool like this, we can actually perform the investigation easily to kind of understand what's happening back and forth. And I'll show you guys a step in a second how you can go off and use Wireshark to even extract out even more details for your investigation. So one more really quick before we go on from the Kiwi Log Viewer. If I go File and I say Open File again, there's another one in here that is an FTP attack. Now, typically, if it is a brute force attack, what you have is commonly a attacker is submitting request after request after request, and each request usually has some type of identifying code that goes along with it. So if it's a response that's a 500 series response, usually that means that in this case it's unsuccessful. So what I've done here already before the exercise is I've gone under the options here in the Kiwi Log Viewer, and I've gone to the highlighting section. And what I've done is I've set it up so that I can see every time that in this case, attacker is unsuccessful, it will respond with a response code 530. So you see all the red ones in here. And then I also put one in here to see when the attacker is successful. So typically a success code starts with a 200, usually in this case 230 for FTP. And so here if I go through my list, I can, there it is. So we can see when the actual attacker was able to compromise the victim site or server or workstation by using this highlight technique with the Kiwi Log Viewer. Okay. Now I'm going to pivot from this really quick over to the Wireshark. So Wireshark, another really popular tool to use as a network defender, as a person that's going to be in incident response or doing digital forensics. So the first thing I want to do is I want to open up a sample packet capture file that I have here for us. So this first one is basically, all it is just a standard packet capture here, and I've basically gone through and I've captured some data. Now with this capturing of data, I can see here if I go in HTTP, I can actually focus on areas of interest to mine. So this particular packet capture was a web application type of attack. It was, again, going with the last section, it was a brute force, or it was an attempt to log on to a workstation and seeing if that could be successful. So you can see the HTTP GET request here that the user had submitted, and in this case that was to the website, and this is the first stage. So getting and calling the site is always the first stage, and then what will happen next? Well, typically, if it's an attack, a lot of the capturing or a lot of the submission of the passwords is done with the HTTP post request. So if I wanted to, what I could do is I could go off and I could say HTTP request.method equals post, and then that'll filter the actual information down even further. And then this one, you actually do see here that the attacker, let me minimize some of this so you can see it a little bit better. The attacker was able to make the post request, and then a little bit further down, you'll find that the user was able to, or attacker was able to log on with admin, and then the password was QWERTY@13. This is why we don't want to utilize HTTP, because if somebody's capturing those communications, absolutely they'd be able to see that information in plain text. So you can kind of use Wireshark as a good tool when you're doing an investigation to see what the attacker is doing. Now, let me show you one more before we finish for today. So I also have one here of a DNS tunnel or DNS remote attack. So ideally, if an attacker wants to be stealthy about the way that they go about their extracting information from a company, they'll use protocols often in a way that's not typical of that protocol to allow for transactions to go between the attacker and the victim that's actually, in this case, being compromised. So here we have a DNS tunneling attack where the attacker has gained a foothold into the organization, is using a protocol, in this case, that's pretty popular to use on enterprise networks today called DNS. And it allows us to kind of see what the attacker is able to carry out with that DNS exfiltration attack. So if I come in here and I say, let's focus on the DNS traffic, okay, then I can kind of see some of the queries and stuff like that. But if I want to kind of dig into it a little bit more, what I can do is I can right-click on this DNS request that's happening in the packet capture and go down here to follow the TCP stream. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. What I want to do is I want to show you the TCP, not the actual UDP request. So I'm going to go TCP port equals 53. That way I get the DNS port, and then I'll go ahead and I'll say follow the TCP stream. So sure enough, if we look at this, and what happens with the stream is the blue text is what's basically server side, and the red text is what's happening from the attacker's perspective. So the attacker has compromised a workstation, in this case Windows XP, and has issued the directory command to list out what's in that directory, and then he exited really quick. So here we can actually see the attacker, as they would be typing these commands, sending those over to the victim that has been compromised, and then being able to extract that through a Wireshark packet capture. Thanks for being with me, guys, today as we go through this little time. If you have any more interest at all, contact Training Concepts for any of the site details or anything to be able to take a training here of any of our EC Council classes. Thanks so much. This is Ralph signing off.